I was afraid of this. Leftko. Tom Pelissero saying that Hank Fraley is staying in Detroit as the run game coordinator and offensive line coach, which was my fear after they lose their offensive coordinator, their defensive coordinator. Now, I thought if he stayed, he'd be given the title of offensive coordinator. So I thought, all right, well, they're gonna say, well, you want to go to Seattle, be the OC? You can just do it here where you're comfortable, where you've been, where you know the players, you know the city, you don't have to move. You can have that same job. Well, he's not getting the same job, but according to Pelissero, he is being promoted, which obviously will come with a raise, and he doesn't have to uproot, and he knows what he's dealing with. So he is staying. He's going to stay there with Dan Campbell, and that's a bummer. I don't even know if he was the best option. He was just the one I wanted.
Yeah,
but
that's why you're broken up with that.
Something we'll talk about, as the show goes on, just the sort of a very deliberate pace to what they're doing here. And the fear is that this will happen, that, if they like Kubiak, he ends up somewhere else. Or if they like Udinsky, he gets snapped up by somebody else. So I don't know. I just have sort of a question about their pace with this.
There have been a number of NFL experts that we've had on, that have been on the station over the past couple of weeks. They all seem to like Hank Fraley, but because of what he did for the offensive line. So to maybe mitigate some concern or fears here for Seahawks fans, I don't think he was ready to be an offensive coordinator yet. And it seems like that's why he stayed in Detroit at this title, run game coordinator, offensive line coach. Now, if the Seahawks, from everything we were hearing from these experts, from everyone who said, from Mark Schlereth to Tom Pelissero to everyone that said, Hank Fraley is great. He's a great O-line coach. It's what the Seahawks need, but he's never called plays. Mm-hmm. If the Seahawks had hired him in that role, that would have been perfect. We had heard about maybe you pair him with a guy like Udinsky or someone else. That would have been tough to do with all the hiring timelines. So for the sake of just purely an offensive coordinator role, I don't think it's the worst thing for the Seahawks, but they are now, yes, running the risk of exact situations like this, where maybe they did want Hank Fraley in kind of a hybrid role. You bring him in. He didn't have this pay raise and title before, so you technically could have given him this title. You can't make the lateral move. A team can block that. Right. But had the Seahawks given him this title, then you could still get an OC. They didn't do that, and that hurts in that situation. But it just kind of sounds like perhaps it was Hank Fraley dragging his feet because he truly wanted to stay in Detroit, and perhaps the Seahawks wanted to see what else was out there with some of these teams left in the playoffs. But you do lose an option, and there are teams you're competing with now for these OC spots. You have the Raiders, you have the Bucks, that are a very enviable situation. We talked about that. And now out of the three people, as you said, only three people they've gone through the steps of having two interviews with. Mm-hmm. One of them's off the board. So it is a tough situation. I found this interesting, Bob. So this news started to come out before Tom Pelissero officially reported it, because Lions beat writers saw a Facebook post from his wife, Danielle Fraley. I guess this is how news is broken, right? Online now. And it was tagged Detroit Lions practice facility, Allen Park, Michigan. She said, year 8 loading, Lions symbol, and then a blue heart. Did you guys really think we'd leave for Chicago? Our hearts are in Detroit. So they didn't even mention Seattle or the Seahawks. It was just either or, it sounds like. He was going to go with Ben Johnson to Detroit. And actually there was a report that we were going to get to a little bit later that the ESPN Bears reporter Courtney Cronin said it's sounding likely that Hank Fraley is going to go join Ben Johnson. So perhaps that necessitated that urgency from Detroit. But after hearing all that, it kind of feels like Hank Fraley never really was seriously considering the Seahawks.
I don't know. We can only speculate. Maybe they weren't sold on him. I don't know. I'm sure they could have made him an offer that said, you're not leaving here. We're not letting you leave. Right. But they, as far as we know, have not made an offer to anybody. So I'm a little curious as to their pace, as I said. And I'm wondering if it means, A, that they weren't overwhelmed by anybody they've talked to. Certainly interested enough to have multiple conversations with 3 different guys that we're aware of. But B, I'm wondering if there's somebody on one of these 4 staffs that are still in the playoffs that they're going, hey, we want to talk to this guy, whoever it may be, maybe they've got, because otherwise, who else are they waiting to speak to? You've got access to everybody else outside of these 4 staffs that are left in the playoffs. We'll see this weekend, and then there'll be 2 more available at the end of the weekend. But that's the only thing I could surmise is, all right, they're kind of dragging their feet for a particular reason here. Maybe there's somebody there, and if it's not somebody on one of these 4 teams, then what are they doing?
Yeah, this is a tough hire, because with a defensive-minded head coach who's so involved in the defense and his day-to-day is the defense, you want a guy on offense who now has autonomy, who you don't have to worry about, you don't have to necessarily collaborate on everything, who is assured enough and who is confident enough that, hey, play calling and overseeing this entire group, you're essentially the head coach of the offense. That's not the case with every offensive coordinator. So it's a hire where it seems like those two that you mentioned now that are left, Udinsky, from everything we've heard, too young, not ready enough to step into that role. Clint Kubiak, he's called plays. You wouldn't have to worry about that. But it's a situation where just 1 year as an OC, 1 year with the Saints, and maybe he didn't have everything the Seahawks were waiting for. It does feel like the option now is someone on these remaining 4 teams in the playoffs. Otherwise, you're right. Why didn't they just hire one of these 2 or now 3 that they brought in and say, look, we really like you. You're not leaving the building. You're our new OC.
Yeah, unless there's somebody else they're still waiting to speak to, which, again, there's no limitations there. Everybody's available to be spoken to.
Yeah, except the 4 teams. So.
Yeah, so if it's somebody outside of these 4 teams, I guess and maybe – listen, not everything becomes public. You tend to hear about when there's an interest in a candidate or anything. So it'd be shocking if they've been speaking to somebody that has not been made public yet. But you never know. Maybe there's something going on behind the scenes, conversations with somebody else that we haven't been made aware of yet. But yeah, if they don't speak to anybody off of any of these 4 rosters, off these 4 coaching staffs, I should say, that are still in the playoffs, and they end up going elsewhere, then I'm going to go, what took so long? You know, I don't know. It's odd. They're just, because we go back to McDonald's comments about, well, we want to be thorough, but we want to have, I can't remember exactly the words he used, but making it sound like we want to do this as quickly as possible, but we're going to be thorough. So they're going to be deliberate. They're not going to rush it, but there is a urgency to it on some level. Yet this pace doesn't say urgency to me.
And this is now kind of similar pace to the coaching search last year, where I think these guys were kind of bemoaning that, you didn't get your head coach hired until after this weekend. Remember, McDonald lost in the AFC Championship game. He's hired a couple days later. And yes, it's an entirely new coaching staff or a first-time head coach. It's different than just an offensive coordinator. But when we did hear that end-of-season press conference from McDonald, it felt like, all right, they're going to get a guy in. You have a couple more weeks to kind of get your vision together with this coach before you go scouting, before you start to do all the draft work that has to be done. Now, it's about the same timeline as when they hired Mike McDonald last year to get this OC in this year.
Yeah, and I also wonder how attractive this job is to other coordinators out there. Like, are they looking at other situations going, you know what, they have a better situation with their quarterback, with their line. I have a better chance of success with Tampa Bay or with whoever, wherever there's an opening for an OC. I'm wondering, just how I'd be curious to see how these candidates view what the Seahawks have to work with. All right, what am I coming into? What do I have at my disposal here? Like, how are they optimistic? Are they like, that line and there's a lot of work that needs to happen there? Gino's older, or is he staying? Is he going? Is DK staying? I don't really know what the level of appeal is. Like, I don't have a sense of, hey, this is a prime job, or are people looking at it as like, they got a lot of work.
On the surface, it seems like the best one available out of all the teams from these losing teams. You're not going to be a coordinator or maybe an assistant on a team that's in the Final Four and want to go unless it's a huge bump in salary and title. But it feels like the Seahawks and the Bucs are the 2 most intriguing and ready-to-win options. So I don't think that would be an issue, but you're right. We just don't know the individual leanings of a guy like Hank Fraley. Sounds like was very loyal to the Lions. They loved it there. They'd been there 8 years, and they just wanted to stay there.